The skin is a complex organ that carries out an enormous number of functions, and there are a number of specialized structures that are found in the skin. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about sebaceous glands. We're going to talk about sweat glands, hair follicles, and fingernails. All of these structures are formed from the skin, they are found in the skin or extending from the skin. Sebaceous glands are glands that release oil into the hair follicle, and the more technical term for that oil is sebum. That's why they're called sebaceous glands. These glands become active during puberty. Sebaceous glands are attached to hair follicles. They actually have a little duct extending from the productive region of the gland, carrying the sebum into the hair follicle. So the sebum then travels up the shaft of the hair and spreads out on the surface of the skin. Sebum lubricates the skin, keeping it moist and supple so that it doesn't dry out, so that you don't get as many of those really annoying cracks forming that form an open pathway for bacteria to get at deeper tissues. So it helps keep the skin intact. It also is bactericidal. There are antibacterial molecules in sebum. Here you're looking at a micrograph of a sebaceous gland and a hair follicle. So here's the hair itself and its follicle. Here's the surrounding dense irregular connective tissue of the dermis. And here are the secretory cells of the sebaceous gland. See how they have a kind of like frothy appearance? It's because they're packed full of vesicles full of sebum. And sebaceous glands are holocrine glands, which means that the secretory cells just basically fill with sebum until they actually rupture, releasing the sebum into the duct, which takes it into the hair follicle. Sweat glands we're probably all somewhat familiar with. They're more technically referred to as sudoriferous glands. They have a long duct that carries product directly to the surface of the skin, and then at the bottom of the duct there's kind of this knot-like structure, and if you are looking at a cross-section of skin under the microscope, imagine taking like a crazy straw and cutting it in half. When you can see, when you look at that cross-section, you can see the duct-like knot of the sweat gland. Cut at all sorts of different angles. You may have some straight-on cross-sections where you can see the lumen in the center and the secretory cells around it, but most of what you're going to see are going to be oblique sections. You can still see a little bit of the lumen and the secretory cells around it. Sweat glands use merocrine secretion, where their product is just secreted through exocytosis into the duct, and then there are surrounding cells called myoepithelial cells with a contractile function that can actually squeeze and push sweat up and out of the duct. And the activity of those myoepithelial cells increases as your body temperature increases. That's one of the triggers for the myoepithelial cells to contract and squeeze sweat up onto your skin, and that's why you get sweaty when it's hot out or when you're exercising. Then that sweat can evaporate and cool you down. Sweat itself is basically 99% water. There's some salt to it, so if you've ever tasted sweat or had it run into your mouth, you know it has kind of a salty taste. There's antibacterial proteins and some metabolic waste. If you look at the page on skin functions, to talk a little bit about one of the functions of the skin being excretion of urea. Normally not really enough to be noticed, though. There are actually two types of sweat glands found on your body. The sweat glands that you're most familiar with are the eccrine sweat glands. And these are the ones that are found over most of your body, basically all parts of your body that have hair. And these are the ones that are important for thermoregulation. You also have sweat glands that are called apocrine sweat glands. And these guys are found in a very limited location. They're only found in the armpits, the axillary region, and your genital regions. And the apocrine sweat glands, they aren't really important for thermoregulation because if you think about it, you don't get a lot of evaporation at your armpits or your genital region. Apocrine sweat glands actually their sweat is a little bit different. It's still a lot of water and salt and antibacterial proteins, but it also contains more fatty molecules and proteins that are broken down by bacteria. And when these fat and proteins are broken down by bacteria, that releases a smell. So if you've ever wondered why your armpits and genital regions tend to get a little smellier than the rest of your body, that's actually because the bacteria are more active in that region because they are getting fed by specialized sweat glands in that region. The apocrine glands are also a little larger, a little bit deeper, and they secrete into hair follicles at this region. There's a lot of speculation about what the main function of the apocrine sweat glands are, since they have such little effect on thermoregulation. It's thought that there may be a sexual function in terms of that the smell produced by this apocrine sweat may function as human pheromones, kind of molecules that signal others around us, molecules of attraction. But that's a pretty hypothetical idea, and it's the idea of humans actually responding to pheromones is pretty controversial. So the eccrine sweat glands are the most abundant sweat glands. Apocrine sweat glands are the smellier sweat glands in your armpits and genital regions. You actually also have specialized sweat glands in your ear and the mammary glands in the breast. So the glands in your ear that secrete earwax are kind of specialized sweat glands with a much waxier, much more lipid-rich secretion. And the mammary glands in the breast are modified sweat glands as well. Highly modified product that is obviously much better for feeding an infant. So you can think of breast milk as basically being highly modified sweat. On most places in your body, you have hair follicles. This is basically every surface of your body except for the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. And the hair follicles of your scalp are a little bit deeper, so the hair on your scalp is much more deeply embedded. Hair follicles you can basically think of as being infoldings, pockets in the skin. So if we're tracing the epithelium, the epidermis of the skin continues on like that, and then it just kind of dives down to form the pocket of the hair follicle, with the connective tissue still all around. This is a hair follicle image where you can actually trace from the bottom of the hair follicle up to the surface of the skin. Oftentimes in looking at cross-sections of skin under the microscope, you may just see a portion of the hair follicle. You may not necessarily be able to trace it all the way up to the surface. So there's a hair follicle, there's a hair follicle, there's a hair follicle. This is probably a scalp slide because the hair follicles are very deep extending down into the hypodermis, which you can tell because you can see the adipose tissue around the hair follicles. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on the anatomy of a hair follicle. This is a kind of a cartoon version. You can see that you have the hair bulb is the deepest part of the hair follicle. This is where the hair itself actually grows out from. The actual actively dividing region of the hair bulb is called the hair matrix. So this is where cells, keratinocytes are born, and then they're pushed up and become part of the hair itself. There's an erector pili muscle attached to each hair follicle. This is just a single smooth muscle cell that when it's stimulated, can actually pull the hair erect. In us, this just looks like goosebumps. In your cat or dog, when your cat or dog gets agitated, and their fur kind of stands on end, making them look a little bit bigger and fluffier, that's because their erector pili muscle are getting activated. We don't have dense fur, so it just looks like we get little bumps in our skin. So the erector pili muscle can, when it's stimulated, it contracts, pulls the hair upright, giving us goosebumps. You can also see the sebaceous gland attached to the hair follicle. You can see the hair shaft itself. The hair shaft is the region where the hair has become completely keratinized. Deeper in the hair follicle, it's referred to as the hair root, where the hair is in the process of becoming keratinized, but it's not fully keratinized yet. In these images, we're zooming in on the hair bulb itself. You can see you have the hair papilla down here, and this is like the dermal papillae that we talked about in the Anatomy of the Skin video. This is just a little extension, a little bump of dermis that extends up into the hair bulb. There are capillaries inside that to bring nutrients and oxygen to the hair matrix, which is the actually dividing region of the hair. So if your hair is growing, that's because the matrix is dividing and pushing cells up and out. And this is, the cartoon version. This is the actual histogram version. You can see this paler region, that's the hair papilla. The matrix is this initial layer of cells that are actively dividing. You can also see here, you can see melanin deposits giving coloration to the hair. And they're acquired by the keratinocytes, and they stick with the hair as it grows up and out. Fingernails are kind of related to hair follicles in that they're also pockets of epithelium. So you have your epidermis, and it kind of goes in and wraps around the base that the fingernail grows from, with connective tissue underneath that, and then adipose tissue underneath that. And this cutaway image actually shows the bone, too. Again, you have the nail root, or the nail matrix, which is the region that the nail actually grows from. So you actually have mitotic cells here that are pushing the nail up and out. And both the nail and hair is made up of keratin, just like the keratin in the stratum corneum of the rest of your skin. But the keratin is arranged a little bit differently in hair versus nail. In hair, keratin proteins are helix-shaped. They're arranged in spirals. Remember, helix is just a fancy term for a spiral. But in nails, keratin proteins are arranged kind of like a sheet woven back and forth. And so that's why nails take on a different shape than hair does, and also tend to be a lot stronger than hair. A little bit of terminology. You have the eponychium of a nail as well. You may be more familiar with it as your nail cuticle. It's a layer of skin that actually extends up over the nail body, providing protection from bacteria. It keeps bacteria from entering into the nail root and damaging the spot that the nail grows from. You also have the hyponychium here, which is underneath the nail. One important part of the nail is the lunula, and that's this kind of half-moon shape at the base of the nail, where the nail is attached firmly to the skin. Basically, it's the part of the nail root that you can actually see. The lunula is clinically important because it is a good place to look for changes in skin tone. So if a person is developing jaundice or cyanosis, the lunula may be the first place that you can actually see it. Before you see it in the rest of the skin that's more heavily, maybe more heavily pigmented. So if you see a yellowish tint or a bluish tint in your lunulas, you might want to have it checked out by a doctor. Nails in general can be revealing of health, not necessarily just the lunula itself, but the way the nail is growing. If the nail is white or yellow or thickened, or if it increases in size at the end of the fingers, that's a condition called clubbing. It can indicate liver disease. Yellow nails may be associated with diabetes or a fungal infection. Inflammatory diseases like psoriasis or arthritis can often cause kind of a ripping or pitting of the nails. Thyroid disease can lead to cracked and split nails, and if you see a dark line under the nail, in the skin under the nail, that can be a melanoma, actually. Alright, we've just done a quick introduction to some of the important accessory structures of the skin. After studying this video, you should be able to identify these accessory structures and talk about what they do. So what do sebaceous glands do? What do sweat glands do? Talk about the two different types of sweat glands, eccrine and apocrine, as well as describe the basic structures of a hair follicle and a fingernail.